Now, with the national election a stone's throw away, scenario planner Clem Sunter highlights a few flags to watch out for, which are likely to influence scenarios and shape the country post-May 29th. He mentions 5 flags and joins us now to unpack that in greater detail. Clem, an absolute pleasure and a good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, yeah.
Well, Clem, I think before we get into South Africa, the globe at large this year will see many elections. I think the globe is also seeing its own themes emerging. I'm keen to actually maybe start off by looking at that. What are we seeing happening around the world right now that does inform where we are in terms of global democracy?
Yeah, look, it is a world of elections. The biggest election ever is taking place in India at the moment. But, you know, what I'm trying to draw attention to in the articles I write on the immediate future is that the world at the moment is in a very divided, polarized state. And we have 2 major wars going on, one in Israel and one in the Ukraine. And so, you know, it's really tough out there. It's not like the 1980s and 90s when there was globalization and free movement of people and goods around the world. We're now in a much more sensitive state, and it's against that background that the South African election is taking place.
And of course, right here at home, Clem, our own complexities here. Our democracy is only 30 years old. It's actually pretty young, but a lot is actually happening here at home. I'm keen to actually speak about some of the flags that you've highlighted in the articles that do really, give light to where we are as a country.
Well, the most important positive flag that I put on the table for South Africa is the fact that we have lots of very able entrepreneurs in this country. For ordinary people going to shopping malls or going to restaurants, you've got centers of excellence offering food and all the goods that you need for your own household. They're offered in a world-class manner. You won't get better in America or the UK. So what the ground demonstrates is that South Africans work as real teams to deliver those goods and services. And therefore, we have something to build on after the election. And what is most important as a flag is that people realize that if this country wants to get to a 3 to 5% per annum economic growth, then a lot more emphasis is going to have to be put on opening up the economy and really helping entrepreneurs expand their businesses from townships into the mainstream economy. The really good ones will then expand their businesses overseas. And what delights me is that more and more people are writing articles like this because work has changed. In the last century, you created jobs by having big businesses opening mines and opening other projects. But those days are gone with robots and automation. Most of the jobs in the world now are being created by medium and small business. And it's that flag that has to be accepted by whatever party or coalition comes into power. And the other major flag is that we've got to get our infrastructure right. I mean, I remember Deng Xiaoping saying, in 1978, there are 2 things that China must do to grow its economy. It's got to have proper ports and roads and hospitals and schools and all those kind of things. And that's the infrastructure. And we as the Communist Party must do something about that. And then the second thing is we must allow ordinary Chinese citizens to create wealth for themselves. And it's exactly the same here. We've got to get our infrastructure back in order, and we've got to allow all those incredibly able entrepreneurs to create wealth for themselves.
Clem, I can't help but notice that you mentioned the word coalition with absolute, gumption and absolute conviction here. Let's talk about coalitions in South Africa and what we see here when we look at the political flag. And May 29th, we literally are a month away from this election. I'm just keen to get your thoughts on that and where we are in terms of our politics and our policies.
Well, the latest polls show that the ANC can be um, anywhere between 41 and 49%. Obviously, there's a scenario where they actually win the election, contrary to the Lotus polls, and they will continue in power as a single party. But if they fall into the 40s, obviously in the higher 40s, they will probably have to do a deal with some of the minor parties. But then in the lower 40s, they've got this choice between having a coalition with the EFF and MK and governing in that way, or they will have to do a deal with the DA. And of course, that is taking up a lot of opinion pieces at the moment as to which way they'll go. But it doesn't alter the economic realities of this country. I mean, when I did the original scenarios in the late 1980s of the high road and low road, I always said there are two crossroads. There's the political crossroads, where we have to become a proper democracy where everybody can vote. And thank heavens, Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk did exactly that in the early 90s. But then I always said there's an economic crossroads where you have to completely transform the economy so that you follow up with a high economic growth rate. Because if you don't do that, then all the political gains can wither away in a slow decline to a failed state. And we are at that second crossroads right now where we have to do something to transform ourselves into a proper inclusive economy.
You also raise the crime and corruption flag here, Clem, and that sounds like a real direct threat to this economic crossroads. Let's just talk about that aspect.
Well, that flag is the number one flag, crime and corruption, because, you simply can't have a healthy economy where people are fearful of violence, where you have gangs operating, where you have obviously corruption in government and corruption elsewhere in the private sector. Economies cannot operate when that flag is up the flagpole. So we obviously have to watch that flag very carefully. I do think that a lot has changed in the 5 years from when we had serious corruption in this country. But we've got to do a lot more because, you need clean government and a clean private sector on the whole to create the kind of economic growth rate that I'm talking about of 3 to 5%.
When we started the conversation, Clem, you mentioned that the world is divided, it's polarized here. Now, South Africa has the task of actually being able to straddle this very thin line of neutrality. Let's talk about that neutrality flag as one, a very important one. It can lead to us being caught up, I think, in spaces and in conversations that we need not be involved in. But like you say, in a divided world does require this very, very thin line to be straddled very carefully.
It is. It's a very thin line because we're in this very polarized world where you're either for or against, different nations, and it's very difficult to tread the middle path. And it showed with the Lady R incident in Simonstown, where we were accused of putting weapons on for the Russians. And it's shown more recently in the whole case that we've brought at the International Court of Justice on the question of genocide in Israel. And yes, one may do things like this, but one's got to always be aware of how one makes sure that one isn't being blocked out of the markets where we are selling our goods and which contribute to our exports. And so it's a real process of juggling. And yeah, we are a member of BRICS, which is, the other very important group in the world of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and ourselves. And now, of course, a whole bunch of other nations are joining that. And yeah, we've got to make sure that even as a member of BRICS, we've got to keep the markets of Europe and America open for all the goods that we can make here and which we can sell competitively in those countries as well. So it's a tight path. But one of the great things about South Africa is we are a democracy. We're a proper functioning democracy, and we're going to show that in a month's time. And if you listen to Joe Biden, he talks about democracy versus autocracy, and we're on the good side. We've shown that it can be done, and it's brilliant. And that's why I think that at the moment we're okay in terms of not being blocked out by any part of the world.
I must also ask you, Clem, about social cohesion here at home. Just getting your thoughts on that one, looking at the scenarios that you drew up in the 1918, where we are then, today here. Are we looking like a cohesive society? As you said, our democracy functions, it functions well. There's no doubt about that. But do we sing out of the same hymn book? Do we have the kinds of values that make us a cohesive society that can drive forward, moving ahead to the growth that you speak about as we see this economic crossroads really being more and more important?
Yeah, I do see social cohesion all around me. I'm not trying to be blind to the terrible income inequality that there is in this country, the terrible unemployment rate that we're seeing in this country, the terrible conditions that people live in some of our townships in this country. I'm not blind to that, and I'm saying that we've got to now address that through creating an inclusive economy. But what really gives me hope is that when I go to a shopping mall and I go to a retail store, the team that serves me is made up of all races working very happily and effectively together as a team. And you go to any restaurants, you have a similar deal, that at the basic level, South Africans can work very effectively and happily together. And that's what really we've got to build on in order to create this inclusive entrepreneurial economy that I've been talking about over the last 10 years.
Brilliant, Clem. It's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank you so much for speaking to us this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Go well. That was scenario planner Clem Sunter.